It's time to take a quick look at embroidering eyelets and also eyes. And I'll talk a little bit at the end about some of the terminology and then about how to use these. This is an eyelet wheel. I have a separate video on those. And this is an Algerian eye, and I've also got a separate video on that. So what I want to demonstrate is just doing kind of a more basic version of it. This is what I call an eyelet, and it's just, I'm using it to make an eye. So you can see we're already in for some confusion. Technically, from what I've read, the eye or eyelet is usually stitched in kind of a box shape to make a square. And you can see that when you're stab stitching, and by that I mean going straight up and straight down, it doesn't matter whether you're sewing right or left-handed. You can go around clockwise or you can go around counterclockwise. The main thing is that let's see, I've got a knot back here, so I'm coming up on the outside. You go from the outside in to the center. At least that's how I do it. And you can see that there's eventually going to be a little bit of a pulling taking place as I stitch, so that this center is going to start to open up. Now, you can also promote that by taking a little stiletto, and in advance, you can go in and open up the hole a little bit so that you can make a more decorative effect. And there are just so many different ways historically where that would be used. Now, you'll notice that in this case I was going around counterclockwise, and that was going to make the little square. What you don't do is start crossing over. Like once I've started here, I don't then say, oh, now I'm going to come over to this side, because it's going to make for some irregular pulling. You're going to make a nice even box if you just go all the way around in the same direction. But you don't want to start crisscrossing here, especially because, if you do something like this, you're going to get a lot of thread on the back, and you really just want to want the stitches sort of to pull away from this little center and make a pleasing little stitch. Now, here's where we're going to go a little bit rogue. The eye that I stitched on that little goat that I showed you, I wanted to have it fairly densely filled in, and I wanted it to make a circle because I was making an eye shape. Typically, you have 8 legs, as you would like this. I've got 8 points marked around the box. But if I want to fill it in more densely and, do something where I'm just trying to create an image. I'm not doing an embroidery sampler like, an old-fashioned sampler, and I'm not doing this on counted cloth. I'm just trying to create an image. So I can do it like this, where I just pull it up from the back, and I go straight down to the center. And the one problem that you run into with this is that when you're finished, you're going to, you don't want to have a big knot right at the back like this when you're all finished, because you don't want to just tie it off and just have a big knot. So I recommend you work the thread up a little ways, and then you can knot it off, or you can, kind of put the needle through the thread and make its own little situation on the back where it doesn't pull out. I mean, I'm not going to throw any of these things in the laundry, so it doesn't have to hold up to a big amount of friction on it, but I do want to have a nice knot in the back. Now, the amazing Jacqueline Enthoven, in her book, she makes her eyes, and she just uses the term eye. She doesn't use eyelet. She begins hers at the center. Now, she still goes around consistently. She doesn't just crisscross back and forth, but she just leaves a tail where she doesn't have it knotted, and I can feel that I'm leaving a good sized tail in the back. And then, of course, if you do this, you've got to stitch carefully so that you don't just keep stitching through your tail on the back. And she makes hers like this. She actually makes hers in a box. I could have started this in the box. But when she's finished, then she turns it over on the back and she takes this little tail that she started with and weaves that into the work. So again, she doesn't have a big knot on the back. And she doesn't make any knots in it. She just, a lot of people do that. Well, they'll just weave it through the thread on the back, and that way it just makes it a little flatter and tidier. So let's just take another quick look at how dense these eyelets are. Now, I wanted to talk about terminology. I call these eyelets because I've seen that term used, but really I feel as if the terminology has gotten kind of muddied and confused. And, I don't know why I'm making an eye, but I'm using an eyelet stitch. That's just something that I've seen, that when you make this stitch, it's called an eyelet. That's the only reason that I use that terminology. It's just kind of a habit. I think the origins of the two different terms have been a little bit muddied and lost. So here's an Algerian, this is an Algerian eye. You can call that an eyelet. I've seen people call it that. This is an eyelet wheel. And if you had an opening in the center or not, I've seen it's only called an eyelet if you have an opening in the center. But really, it's just a little weird to call something an eye wheel. And I think that's the real reason this has come to be called an eyelet wheel, even if it's not making a true eyelet. Now, if you were making something, like a nice lacy curtain or something, and you were see how these have a little bit of an opening in them. These are Algerian, what is called an Algerian eye, but with their little opening in it, it's really kind of more an eyelet. So you pick your own terminology, and when you're making one of our patterns that calls for an eyelet, just keep in mind that we're using it to mean something like this, rather than a more structured Algerian eye or something that would be on more of a grid. It's a very useful stitch that you can see. You can do all kinds of little decorative or organic designs with it.